Good afternoon, everyone. Good morning, good night, from wherever you're logging in. This again is Arjen in the Factory broadcast. You have seen us probably before in our monthly webinar about interesting HR topics or HR trends that are dominating the current people pillar or people development. As you can see, I'm currently not in my normal film studio because I'm homebound or quarantined with the corona effects. So I'm logging in live from my house. However, my guest, of course, today will be Tom Haak, and he is in our studio. I'm very happy to announce and introduce him because he will take us through the new HR trends that we will see for 2021. Last year, we had Tom as one of our first exclusive guests in our webinar, and he shared with us what we would look forward to in 2020. What would be the things dominating the HR agendas? And maybe you remember some of them. Use of HR tech, personalization of our HR tooling, speed in terms of action, learning, and agility, employee focus, ways of organizing. He talked about CSR, and of course, specifically about things like analytics, productivity, and the role of the HR director or the HR person within, well, the world of business. But now 2021 has come. I truly believe Tom had some interesting insights last year, but he couldn't have predicted the way we look back at the year. How did Corona impact our development, our business performance, etc.? And now in this new year, I'm really eager to know and to learn and get updated on what is the latest trend that we will see for the next year. So Tom, welcome. Please join us. I'm really happy that we can do this online.
Thank you. Nice to have me again. And I am in your studio, so that's a good change for me.
Yeah, we actually changed from, I think last year you called in from your place and I was on that side. So it's good to see this, see the switch. I'm really happy that you're here. How are you?
I'm excellent, thank you. The sun is shining, and I made a little trip to Amsterdam, so I'm in a good mood.
Perfect. And yeah, I'm of course eager to know what you have up your sleeve about the newest trends of 2021. But maybe let's look back a little bit on last year. How do you look back at 2020?
Well, yeah, as a preparation for this session, I had to look at the video of last year's session, which is almost a year ago. And first of all, the title was How to Use HR Trends to Accelerate Out of the Crisis. That didn't work, I think. So we didn't accelerate out of the crisis. So unfortunately, I was a little bit too positive at that moment in time. But I think, looking back, I think indeed, we have seen that the last year has acted as a kind of accelerator, incubator. Yeah. So many trends we have seen developing, and probably a lot faster than we expected a year ago or more than a year ago.
If I look at the speakers that we've had in the last series or the last episodes, I truly believe that your prediction of using the crisis as an accelerator has been, well, applied or obtained by many organizations. So even if they weren't aware of it, they were maybe changing the business while they were still open. But I do believe some of these trends have definitely accelerated. Your use of HR tech or digitization of the workplace, for sure, we've grown much further than we might have expected even.
Absolutely. And I spoke a lot about personalization. I think there I still have some doubts, I would say. Mm-hmm. That you see, and that's of course also kind of reinforced by the government. That for example, the statement is still everybody should work from home. That doesn't leave a lot of room for personalization. In, for example, when talking about the hybrid office. So I think, and I would hope, and I will talk about it, that we will create more room for personalization going forward, and that also the government appreciates that a little bit better than they currently do.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. So I know that's well, you have probably 11 new trends to look forward to. Yeah. You've been doing this since 2014, so yeah, you have some experience in predicting maybe the future of HR. Why do you feel this is maybe not only relevant for HR? I mean, this is for any business leader a relevant topic.
Absolutely. And what we have seen one of the lessons also of the last year, that the aspect of people in organization gets more attention, has gotten more attention. So that also creates more room for HR to increase its impact. So I think more attention, it's a good time. And you've read that several times. It's a good time to be in HR, and we have to live up to those expectations. Expectations are high, and I think we can live up to those expectations, and that's important for every organization. The people aspect is super important, and not only for people in knowledge working type of settings, but for everybody who is working, and for all kinds of organizations we see.
Yeah, because there's a lot of emphasis on what we call, maybe in the wrong term, the white collar or the blue collar population, but pretty much anyone is a working population right now, and we have to foster our human capital in a way, yeah, to remain agile, but also to maybe find that acceleration again.
Yeah, I agree with you. And sometimes if you hear, and also if I hear myself talking and other people, it looks like everybody is a knowledge worker. Huh?
Yeah.
But if you look at where do most people work in professions where you cannot work from home. It's people who work in transportation, people who work in warehouses, people who work in hospitals. So there's many people. And for many of those people, the pressure also has increased in the last year. So that's another element we have seen. If you're working in the Amazon or Bol warehouses, well, the pressure is increased because people are ordering more. If you're working in a hospital, the pressure, of course, has gone up. If you're a truck driver or a bus driver, well, the pressure also has gone up. So we have to also look at those professions and what we can do for them. Absolutely.
Yeah, and I guess a few topics are more relevant to these populations, maybe even than others. I'm considering physical safety or the feeling of well-being. Whereas also you hear a lot about absenteeism or leave, or people being on sick leave, maybe easier than at other times. So I think there's more factors influencing their decision to go to work, to stay there, to give the best, to be engaged maybe in their job, but also in their organization, because there are so many external factors influencing that now as well.
And let's not underestimate the pressure on people in a lot of professions. Absolutely.
Okay, well, I'm going to ask you to share your trends. I just want to remind the audience, so just for everyone, we record this session as well. You can find it back. You will get a little link in your email to also look back at the recording. But more importantly, you can also ask your questions and share your ideas. So on the form below, you can share directly your question. I will get it in here, and I will try to, well, help make sure that we answer all of them. Tom will answer them live. If there in any way would be a time limit, we have something extended today where we will join the Clubhouse session. We invite you all to join the conversation as well. So should we not have time or capacity to answer your question now, I'm sure that we'll get to it after this live broadcast in our live Clubhouse session together. So Tom, please take us along. Take it away.
Okay, super. So I have, well, around 20 minutes. I will try to do it in my normal high speed. As Arjen said, if you have questions, ask them, and I will stop in the middle somewhere at least to answer the first questions. The title said 11 trends for 2021, and I've written about that. If you really want to learn about all the 11 trends, I recommend you to go to my article on the website of hrtrendinstitute.com. I might not be able to cover all of them today. My key message, I would say, for today, and I hope you can all see this. The key message is, I think 2020 was a year of adaptation, and we have talked about that. And we have seen that many organizations were able to adapt in a remarkable speed to the current crisis. And HR contributed a lot to that. A lot of things were implemented a lot faster than we thought in the past. But often it was adaptation. It was bringing meetings from a physical meeting to a virtual meeting, bringing the physical classroom to an online classroom. I'm in the conference business. I've been in many conferences in the last year, but most of these conferences had the traditional setup, a speaker with PowerPoint, a Q&A, and then the next speaker on one day or half a day. So that is adaptation. That is not real transformation. So the question is also for you, how can we make the coming year, this year, 2021, a year of real transformation, not only of HR, of course, but also for the organization themselves. If you look at issues high on the agenda of organizations, of course, it differs a lot per organization, but there are some common elements we see. One is many organizations are in survival mode. They are still in survival mode. And if you look, I walk down from the station to the office of a factory, and you see a lot of restaurants closed, a lot of shops closed. Many of those organizations, I think, how do we survive? We thought it was going to last a couple of months. Now it is a year. So survival mode for many organizations. And of course, there are also organizations that benefit from the crisis, luckily. Survival mode. How can we survive, and and that's back to the transformation, how can we transform our business in such a way that we can grow again? The second topic you hear a lot about is resilience. And I will come back to that. But basically, it's the question, this is not the last crisis we are facing. Maybe we were not well prepared for the current crisis, but how can we prepare ourselves better for crisis to come? How can we increase the resilience of our organizations and also the people in our organizations? And I will come back to that when I talk about anti-fragility, because I like anti-fragility a little bit more than resilience. The third theme, which is high on the agenda of many organizations, and of course it has to do with survival, is innovation. And if you read current reports, there are worries about the power of innovation at this moment. Is our innovation power still big enough? And already some months ago, you could hear CEOs of tech companies, for example, Frans van Houten of Philips. They said, well, our creative people, our people in research and development, they suffer when they have to work continuously from home. Innovation is not something you can totally plan. Innovation benefits from casual collisions, meeting strange people, having strange encounters, sparking ideas. And that is suffering, especially for those people who have to work a lot from home. So innovation high on the agenda, and typically an area where HR can contribute a lot to keep the innovation power in organizations, whether they are small or large. And the last issue we talk a lot about, it is well-being. Well-being. I will not talk about it a lot today, but it's high on the agenda. There the question is, well-being of whom? Are we only looking at the well-being of our employees, the people on the payroll, or do we take a wider scope? It's also possibly about the well-being of our clients. It's about the well-being of suppliers. It's about the well-being of candidates. It's about the well-being of people in the wider society. And that's one of the trends we currently see, that the expectation is more and more that organizations take a wider responsibility and not only for the people on the payroll of their organization. So let's say the big theme from adaptation to transformation. Some issues, and I'm sure you have your own issues on top probably of the issues I just mentioned. And I've taken my pile of my 11 trends. I will start with, I reordered them a little bit, and I put the trends I'm most passionate about at this moment on top, and then I will see where we end. Number one, I called ethical leadership, and maybe it's also about HR activism. And this is about HR, of course, not only about HR, but here I focus on HR. We see many issues in organizations, also in the past year, also, of course, before that. And some of those issues are very severe. And when you talk about sexual harassment issues, when you talk about discrimination issues, there are really serious issues, and we have read many reports about that. And also, let's say, up to last week, every week there appear stories of fraud, of harassment, etc. I am always looking in those stories. Where is HR in those stories? Where does HR appear? And often HR is invisible. You don't hear a lot about HR. So there is a role for HR, not only in the super severe issues, but there are also other issues which are more, I don't say they're not severe, but more common. We're talking, for example, about the whole area of diversity, inclusion, equality, belonging. Has been on the agenda a long time, but the movement is not fast enough. And you see that these issues are raising. And often HR is, kind of more a bystander than taking real action. Last week, I was in a presentation of my friend Dirk Jonker. He is the CEO of a people analytics company, Cruncher. And it was a presentation very dear to my heart. It was about people analytics and diversity, belonging, equality, etc. And his plea was, if you really take this issue serious, you should look and measure in the whole chain of let's say the whole HR chain. It's not about just measuring how many females in senior positions or how many people of color in certain positions at the top. It is about looking at your whole chain from, you could say, it starts with employer branding. What do your advertisements look like? Who are the people who are bringing your jobs to the market? In what universities or other educational institutions are you recruiting? Measure that and track where top, for example, females, but it could of course be other groups as well, where they come from. It takes a lot of work. It takes thorough analysis, but it is possible. And if you do it, then you can take action, but it doesn't help say, yeah, we need to do something and the percentage is still too low. If you want something, it is possible in this area, but in other areas as well. So before I get too agitated about this subject, but ethical leadership, number one on my list. And we expect, the expectations are increasing. People are looking at organizations, and organizations cannot say, okay, yeah, we are just an organization. No. And you have to take your responsibility for society. And another example is around well-being. I talked about that. I see organizations that take a lot of efforts, put a lot of efforts in the well-being of their employees, sending boxes with sweets and whatever to their homes. But then the question is, what are they doing for their suppliers? For example, the suppliers in the Far East, in countries where maybe the working conditions are not as good as in the Western world. So also a question for you, what are you doing for your suppliers far away? This was number 1 of 11, so I hope you have some time. Number 2 is about the anti-fragile personality. And I talked a little bit about resilience. Nicolas Taleb, he has written a book a long time ago, the anti-fragile it's called. And he is saying, well, if on the one side you have fragile, and we all know what it is. If I drop this glass, it's broken. Then you can say something is robust, something is unbreakable, but the question is, what is the opposite of fragile? And he calls that anti-fragile. And you could rephrase that as, what is anti-fragile? Things or people or organizations that benefit from crisis situations, that grow faster, that bounce back at a higher level. So it's very actual at this moment to say, hey, how can we strengthen anti-fragility in our organizations? And how can we strengthen the anti-fragility in the people in our organizations? Or where can we find people with anti-fragile characteristics? I've given it, I've looked a little bit into it, and the question is, what are characteristics of the anti-fragile personality? And I found one test that says, well, there are 4 elements that are important for the anti-fragile personality. And I just want to read them to you, also because I like the terminology. And one is proactive adaptation. That's clear. People who are already looking beyond what's happening and seeing how they can adapt quicker. That's an important element of anti-fragility. The second element is, they call that competitive evolution. That's constantly looking, how can we do it better? How can we change it? In a little bit, you could say, a competitive way. The third element they mention is emotional agility. Clear characteristics. I don't have to explain it. The last one I probably like most. That's conscious destructiveness. And your willingness, and it has to do with transformation, your willingness to go back and say, well, maybe we should destroy our current practices and start anew. A constructive destructiveness. And that's a characteristics you should maybe be looking for in your people. You can also, many of you will know the Big 5 personality test. That's with the acronym OCEAN. You can also test anti-fragility with the Big 5 personality test. For example, it is clear that on the dimension O, which is openness, you would expect people to score high. But on the last dimension, neuroticism, there you would expect anti-fragile personalities to score low. I will probably write an article about this one of the coming weeks and talk more about it. But in search of the anti-fragile personality, then the question is, what can you do? This is nicely said, but what can we do to strengthen it? And I'll give just a couple of examples. One is, of course, you can use it in selection. I explained that. Look, when you test people, test them on their anti-fragile characteristics. The second element is, and there's nice research of Buckingham. He has written research about what reinforces, what strengthens resilience in people. So not so much anti-fragility yet, but resilience. And let's assume we can extrapolate that a little bit. He was saying one element, and that's a super open door, but I will repeat it here anyway. That's the relation team leader employee. That is super, super important. Also, when it comes to being, if you feel you have a team leader that supports you and backs you, then you are able to act in a better way. So the strengthening the quality of team leaders is always a high priority for HR. Secondly, and that's interesting, I think, to think about, that he is saying we need, the more you are exposed as an individual to adverse circumstances, the better the more you learn and the more resilient, anti-fragile you become. And that's an interesting, how can we expose people to adverse conditions? And maybe, just a hypothesis, we have drifted a little bit too much away from that in our quest for creating happy work environments, too much focus on well-being, too much reducing stress, where you say, well, if we expose people, maybe they become more resilient. I talked about this with a friend the other day, and he made an interesting remark. He said, well, you have to make a distinction between exposure and psychological safety. You should do two things at the same time. offer people a psychological safe environment, and that's where the team leader comes in again, of course other people as well. The other is, how can you expose people? So I made a little grid, and then I will stop for some questions. This is my to be developed pampering grid. What you want, this is the psychological safety scale. You want to be high on psychological safety, but low on pampering. So how can you find and create work environments where you do both things at the same time? And this might be a plea, for example, for reintroducing more severe job rotation. Put people in situations where you stretch them and where they can learn a lot. This was number 2. But I go to Arjen if there are any questions at this moment before I ramble on.
Sure. Well, thanks, Tom. There's actually a few coming in, so I think it's a good moment to just intervene a little bit. One of my personal questions, which I had, well, I think this relates to the exposure part. How do we expose people who are bound to their home offices? Like, where's the exposure in the current, in the current trend? Globally, everybody's sitting at home, or at least the people that are home office workers.
So, but I won't go into all kind of unethical suggestions. But this is also, if we keep people in their home behind their desk, well, that doesn't increase their resilience necessarily. Maybe we reduce their resilience. So we should, and that's another, we should find ways to expose people again. And this is just mere simple exposure. If you're not exposed to other people and only exposed to people in these kind of settings, that does not help. But so I realize it's not so easy in the current situation. But I mean, you can also send people with a backpack into nature. That's not forbidden at the moment, I think.
So, that's very true.
Yeah.
Good. So one question I got from Mauricio, which I think is underlying these different trends. He's asking us, and I'm reading it as a quote. So, can we really talk about similar global HR trends, as we are all, well, different companies, global companies, medium, small size, based in very well-developed countries, some in lower developed countries. Everyone is facing different situation, different trends at the moment. So, can we talk about the global trends? And he's asking your thoughts on this.
Yeah, and the answer is yes. So I think we can certainly talk about global trends, and the mega trends, if you look at the mega trends in the domain of people organization, those mega trends are there for years and years. They don't change every year. If you look at the mega trends, they are there. And of course, the way these trends are developing and where you are on those trend scale, they differ a lot per geography. Of course, we already talked about that. There's a big geographical differences, but also, of course, industry differences. In some industries, the trends are faster adopted than in other industries. But for example, the long-term trend around technology, that's a global trend, unavoidable. But the trend you can describe as working for money to working for a purpose. Well, that's a trend where in many geographies, and they are, if you say, well, let's talk about purpose, they say, well, let's talk about money. I need to earn money. So there's a variety on those mega trends. And I have an overview in the trend article of 2021. There's an overview of those. I think I listed 11 or 12 mega trends.
Okay.
The trends are global, but the level of adaptation differs per geography and per industry. Absolutely.
Okay, super. Thanks for the clarification. I think, well, I'm not going to hold you back. I have a few questions which are relevant as well, maybe for the Clubhouse conversation we're going to have afterwards. So yeah, please feel free.
I will do a couple of trends speedily in the coming 5-7 minutes, and then we have some time for questions here as well.
Yeah, and we can run a bit later as well. So don't worry about the time.
Yeah.
Let's get to those ones.
So I talked about 2 trends. Of course, I talked about the anti-fragile personality, and I talked about ethical leadership, 1 and 2. Number 5, 3 and 4, I might deal with later, but that is the increasing risk of detachment. And we discussed that a little bit already. But I think, and what we saw in the last year, that initially the mood went up. And we are here at a factory. I have not seen consolidated figures of the engagement surveys of the last year. But my hypothesis would be that in many organizations, we saw an increase of engagement of employees. Because a good crisis also binds people together. We were in it together. People were more connected. And for many people, the situation was not so bad because they could do a lot of work out of home. They didn't have to travel. They could mix their day a little bit better. So initially it went up. Now you see cracks, I could say. I don't know whether that's the right terminology, but it's there are people who are suffering. Not only in the work environment, but also, for example, there are more and more signs that students and people at schools, they are suffering in the current situation, and more people show signs of depression. Also, people in the work environment. So we should be very sensitive to those signs. And of course, there are people who are flourishing, people are doing well, but if the distance from people for many people has increased, we have to make sure we get close again and connect to people and make sure that we keep connecting to people. And I think I made that plea last year as well, but connecting to people, 1. Secondly, making sure your continuous listening architecture, to use the fashionable term, but that I like that a lot. Make sure you are continuously listening. What's going on? Pick up signals and act on that. The danger of detachment is big, and it also creates opportunities for organizations. So for some organizations, this is an excellent time to hire. And it has become a little bit easier to hire internationally as well, because if people are working out of their home, they can change jobs and stay at home and just work for a different employer. So also be very aware of people who are going around the market trying to lure away your good people. But at the same time, you might do the same and look for some really top new people, preferably with anti-fragile personality. I already talked, and I think that's related to this trend, and that's to think about what is the scope of HR. Is your scope as HR professional wide enough? Are you concerned only about the people on the payroll? Are you concerned about other people who contribute to the organization? But also, are you concerned about the clients? Are you close enough to the clients of the organization? And that might be too ambitious, but I think it's good to frame some real heavy ambition. As HR, are you also concerned about what are we as an organization contributing to society in a wider sense? So the scope of HR also has to do with detachment, but because it also has to do with who do you care for? And well, caring, of course, is one of the core qualities, should be one of the core qualities of HR. I take very speedily some of the other trends. One is, and that's a trend I'm quite concerned about, is digital tracking. And of course, it has to do with people analytics. And digital tracking clearly has two sides. We can use technology. We can use technology to help people to do their jobs better. We can also use technology to check and control people in the current situation. And we see both elements. There are organizations that still say, well, you know, trust is good, but control is better. How can we install software, for example, to check whether our employees are really working online and not playing games? There are, if you Google, there's fantastic software called, for example, Monitor Your Employees or Staff Cop. What's in the name? Yesterday, I talked to a very nice tech company, and they work on software where you use not facial recognition, but facial signs to see how engaged people are. And they use it in a lot of areas. A very interesting area is, for example, these type of settings. If I would have asked you up front, okay, I just want to monitor this presentation. Do you allow us to open your camera? We won't do anything with the data, but we track your face, and then I could now have a live feedback on how engaged you as the audience are. That would be very helpful for me, because now I'm talking into a green hole. I don't know how many people there are. I don't know how people are reacting. It would be very helpful for me to get feedback. That's for me. That's not controlling you. It's technology to help me. But the person I was talking to of that company, he was also saying that the same software they use to install in call centers, and of course the people sign a consent form. They say, okay, well, if you work here, you have to sign a consent form. But those call center employees are continuously monitored, and the software analyzes what's happening. And if the attention span gets too low, engagement gets too low, then they take action. Do we like that? Maybe not. Is it really there to help those employees? Maybe not. So the two sides of technology, going forward, we should be very explicit about it. And my plea is to focus a lot more on the technology that is really helping people to be better, and maybe forget a little bit about the controlling software. I realize that I'm at the end of time. I'll just show you to raise your appetite some of the other trends. This always raises a lot of attention. Goodbye, HR business partner. I won't talk about it today. Of course, the hybrid office. We have talked about that. There's an enormous super subject that's skill mapping. Skill mapping. We won't talk about it today. Nudging. Super interesting for the next time. The personal user guide. I recommend you to do that. Go to personaluserguide.com and you can create your own user guide, and that helps other people how to deal with you. I like that. And the last but one, VR breakthrough. I wrote somewhere that I'm still waiting for my Oculus Rift. I did not really order it, but I would like to have one to really test what's going on with VR. And the last one, this is about our too high expectations of leadership. And that's maybe a good last subject to stop with, to finish with. Generally, still, if you read a lot of the articles that pass through LinkedIn, many of them are about leadership. What are the qualities of leadership we should be looking for? What does leadership post-COVID look like? And if you look at those lists, there's always the expectations are so high, and most leaders cannot live up to that. And I think we should let go of those high expectations. be a little bit more realistically, and also there use personalization to use the strengths of leaders, individuals, and not put them, check them on a very long list of requirements they should have. And HR is partly to blame for that. So, Arjen, back to you. We could use more time, but I think this is a good moment to stop and see whether there are more questions. And we should leave some things for next year's session as well. Huh?
Well, you're totally right, Tom, because if you would be able to predict all of it, then, well, we wouldn't have something to talk about next year indeed, or maybe in 6 months from now, to get a little status update on where we stand with this. But there's a few things which I think, well, also kind of struck the audience. Maybe they found your website or they read through again for what the trends were. But you already predicted some of them would stir them up and bring them into a level of discussion. The one which raises most suspicion, or at least most question in terms of the HR community, probably is around well, the end of the HR business partner. I think it's a call for you to say, well, what we're going to do with that title, but also because it's inflated since the start that we used it, if I understand you correctly. Can you briefly bring a bit?
Yeah. And it's very interesting observation that I find HR likes to talk about HR. So the moment I talk about the structure of HR or HR business partner, then I see a lot more interaction than when I talk about other subjects. So observation. Why does HR like to talk so much about HR? Question mark. But I will say something in this regard. I will say something anyway. I think, and there was an interview in a Dutch magazine today published, and I spoke to the journalist, and he made the header. I don't know whether I like it totally, but he said in the header, Tom Haak, HR associates too much with management, and I think that is partly of that message. HR in the last years has continuously argued we should be members of the board, we should be close to management, we are super important. But in that quest to become, let's say, part of top management, they let go, and I say it, of course, a little bit more black and white, and they let go of two things, operations. And HR operations is super important. And initially it was called something like HR administration. Well, nobody likes to be in administration, but operation is super important. But the other side is the employees. That has come back a little bit because the whole employee experience. But still, often the approach is very much top down. HR, and if you go in many organizations, HR is associated with management, and people don't associate HR as people who are there for them. And I think we should. So my current state of mind is that we should kind of split HR. One, operations. That's the big chunk of HR, and most HR, also HR business partners, belong in operations. Also, if you look at the activities of the HR business partners, still, for many of those, 70, 80% of their work is operational. Bring that to the to operations and make sure the operations are very service-oriented and fast and employee-friendly. Then, of course, it helps to have some HR advisors, architects, strategists. You don't need a lot of those, but they are very useful and helpful. So some business partners will do those type of roles, but you don't necessarily need them in every unit of the business. So that you also see that if every unit has their own business partner, that's a waste of talent. And the third area probably is, you can call it employee success. Those are the people who are there to help employees and other people to do their work better and to develop and to grow and to flourish and to use their potential. Maybe also not necessarily connected to the organization. Because often there's a tension. Am I there to help you, or am I there to help the organizations? And those interests are not always aligned. Well, you have certain plans with yourself, and you want to develop. I assume that at the moment you're working for a factory, but
until
you are. If I'm the factory HR person, do you really then want to discuss with me your plans and how to develop and how to grow?
It's an incredible different journey, of course, and an incredible different discussion.
Yeah,
difficult.
So much for the HR business partner, and I also talked a little bit about the structure of HR.
Well, of course, but I think what's interesting of your response as well is in terms of the, let's say, the coach. Many organizations develop these coaches. They say, yeah, this coach is going to bring us forward to the next level of development, but then we're expecting something of these coaches, maybe which is beyond human or beyond. And I think this is your call to urgency for leadership as well, saying, well, we should all be coaching servant leaders. But we're also pretty much robots if we need to tick off all the boxes of what we need to do.
Now, some leaders are good coaches and some leaders are not. So let's not try to push everybody in that, exactly what you're saying. Let's not try to push everybody in that mold, because we also need some super client-facing people, probably more. And if the super client-facing people are maybe not so good coaches, well, let's not bother too much about that, but let's try to organize it in a different way. Absolutely.
Great question from Quentin. I'm seeing this coming in on my screen. So he's asking, Tom, why do you feel or think that employees feel like HR is not there for them? What would be a concrete point of action in this case? What could HR do?
Well, what HR could do, I just answered that, is make the split.
Read between these areas.
Yeah, say I am, and smaller. I see that in smaller organizations they do that. They say, Arjen, here's Tom. We pay him, but he's there for you. Yeah, and he can use technology and he can use all kinds of tools to help you. But he will not come back to us to say, oh, I've talked to Arjen. Well, he's not so motivated. Yeah, or he's not so motivated. Or if that's what often the talent managers are sometimes a little bit, you could say, dual, or they go to management, and I've been in many of those sessions. I'm guilty as well, but I've been in many sessions where we talked about Arjen. What do you think of Arjen? Well, yeah, he could develop faster, or he's not so good as other people say. Or, well, we all know those discussions. Not very helpful for you. No, one is the split, and be very explicit about that. It also has to do with technology. Because we talked about technology, but if we give people technology that helps them, and not necessarily collect all the data centrally, and that's, you see many tools where the data is collected and then aggregated in dashboards that say, hey, Tom's mood is going down, or the department of Tom is not doing well. But I use my watch. I gather a lot of data about how I run and how I sleep and other things. My VO2 max level, whatever. But I don't share it. Maybe with Apple, probably with Apple. But if my employer would collect all that and would say, Tom, no Apple Garmin, because that's what we use, that does not work. So also in technology, focus on tools that help people and give people the tools they want. Yeah. So I think those are two recommendations. There are absolutely more.
What I feel a lot in this, and this may be the closing remark for now as well, but what I feel strongly is that we're moving towards further autonomy of employees, or let's call them co-workers, because employee sounds like somebody different than your co-worker. Co-worker is more like you're a conspirator or somebody that joins you in your journey. But do you foresee that we're moving towards a more autonomous way? Because if I look back at 2020, micromanagement and everything, guided details, this software you're describing, Controlio or employee monitoring, it's a bit of the old school way as well. Why don't
we are moving. I think that the good news is that yes, we are moving to more autonomy and independence. Yes. And of course, there is already a sub-universe where that's happening. Probably the universe where I am in, many of the people I work with, they are not employed or they are partly employed. And so there is a whole universe where that is already the case. So that's the positive thing.
Yeah.
And I think in this graph, I think this is important, and I mean, it's not perfect yet, but there we should say, how can we go low on pampering, but high on psychological safety? But here it is about, how can we help people? But it's also more autonomy. How can we give people their own responsibility and not, you see it a lot also still at the moment, that also on country level, that there are people who are constantly looking at the government. What are you doing for us? It's not good what you're doing. But that, of course, the government should do things, but at the same time, organizations and people should also do things. Back to anti-fragility. And see how they can benefit and see how they can change and not be the victim. Of course, the circumstances are not perfect, and I'm not saying that, but waiting is not waiting until your employer does something might not be the right approach.
It might not be his responsibility in the first place, because who's driving your own success in the first place, right? Yeah. It should be the person, not
the. A little bit liberal, so we have to watch out. But I think.
Okay, well, Tom, I really want to thank you for this session. So, to all of the people in our audience, we're going to continue this in our Clubhouse session in a few minutes.
At 5.
Everybody can join us. You received a link in the email when you registered, but you can also find us straight. Look for the room where you find us and all the moderators as well, and join the stage. Thank you very much for your questions. We get a lot of responses, so I'm really happy with that. It's always good to see what stirs up and where people get excited. But for now, Tom, really, thank you very much. It's been a pleasure to host you again. And I'm really looking forward to, either see an update or a new trend line for next year.
See you in Clubhouse.
Thanks. So everyone in the audience, as a final note, I think it's clear to everyone we're now on a monthly basis, so you can join us in April again for a new webinar. As Tom said, it's more important than ever to listen carefully to your people. And if you want to know more about this, or if you want to join us in this quest, contact the factory. Feel free to reach out. We can help you with this to really understand what are our people saying and what do people really need in their, to find their best employee experience. In terms of the recording, you can watch this back on the YouTube channel of the factory in a few days, hours, depending on where you are at the moment. And finally, if you want to join us in the conversations, you can use the hashtag @FactoryHRLab. So I'm looking forward to see you guys again in April or in a few minutes in the live chat. Thanks very much and see you then.